So the other day I made the terrible mistake of driving in Pittsburgh. And as I was driving across a bridge, pick one, doesn't matter, someone cut me off and then started zigzagging in between cars to get across the bridge as quickly as they could. They ran a red light. It was terrible. And obviously I was not happy about this. And I was concerned not only for this person's safety, but also for the safety of others. And as we were getting off the bridge, I heard sirens go off. And next thing I know, a cop pulls the person over, and I get to pass the car that cut me off at the bridge, as a cop is most likely going to give them a fine. And you should have seen the smile on my face. I was ecstatic when I saw this happen. I was so delighted that someone who had inconvenienced me was going to get what was coming for them. But then in that obnoxious way that religious people do, I started to wonder, is this a good thing for me to be feeling right now? Should I really be happy about somebody else's suffering, even when it is well-deserved? This is not an uncommon feeling. We are often happy when bad things happen to our opponents or enemies. When a criminal is caught and sent to jail, we are happy because that person is going to get what's coming for them. Sometimes we are happy when someone that we don't like at work gets fired. We may become really happy when a politician that we do not like goes through a public scandal that ruins their image. And I'm sure that you can think of many more examples of this. We love it when someone that we don't like or who has done something bad suffers consequences for their behavior. Feeling that way is perfectly natural, but the problem is that the Lord told us that we need to love our enemies. And that may very well be the hardest teaching to follow in all of religion. But how do we do this in practical terms? What does it truly mean to love our enemies? When the Lord said in the Sermon on the Mount that we need to love our enemies, he was sharing an extremely radical idea. The doctrine of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth is sometimes misinterpreted in our modern view as being somewhat egalitarian, where if someone did something bad to us, we had the right to do something equally bad to them. But in practice, the way that this rule was applied was that if someone did something bad to us, we had the right to do whatever we wanted to them, regardless of whether the punishment fit the crime. For example, it wasn't all that uncommon for someone who insulted another person to be murdered. And often that murder would be seen by a lot of people as justified. Unfortunately, this was seen as a very normal thing all throughout the world in the times of the Lord. The Lord himself had many enemies who persecuted him all throughout his life. He was insulted, he was spat on, he was slapped, and even when he was crucified, the Lord was saying about his enemies, "Please forgive them, they do not know what they are doing." The Lord never hated nor took revenge on those who hurt him, and we are meant to follow his example. But we have to be realistic and remember that we need to protect ourselves, our families, and our communities from people who try to hurt us. And sometimes it seems impossible to follow this commandment of the Lord. It's very hard to try and love someone after they have stolen from us or been violent towards us or called us nasty names. Loving people who do those things to us or the people we care about is extremely difficult because we may believe that in order to follow this commandment, in order to love our enemies, we need to support them regardless of what they are doing. And that seems contrary to the principles of justice that the Lord has shared with us. A world in which evil does not suffer any consequences, in the name of a love that does not act to protect the innocent, is a world in which injustice rules. And that is not the world that the Lord wants us to live in or support. A world in which a thief who steals from the poor is allowed to walk free is a world in which we are not following the Lord. A world in which a murderer kills an innocent person and we allow that murderer to walk free without suffering any consequences is a world in which we are not following the Lord. A world in which someone lies to manipulate those around them and that person is not held accountable is a world in which we are not following the Lord. Allowing evil to exist unchecked goes against the principles of justice that the Lord has told us to uphold. So how are we supposed to love our enemies when they are doing those evil things? When the Lord told us to love our enemies, He also taught us that we need to love our enemies wisely. When we are showing love to another person and trying to act with charity, we need to always be looking at what good does that person have in their life. Every single person on this planet is our neighbor, no exceptions. But that doesn't mean that we need to treat everyone in the world exactly the same way. We need to always use our discernment to see what is the best way to act with every individual person. The book New Jerusalem and its Heavenly Doctrine explains this idea further by saying most people nowadays think that everyone is equally their neighbor and that we should be generous to anyone who is in need. It should be part of Christian prudence, though, to check carefully what someone's life is really like and to extend charity accordingly. People who constitute the inner church do this with discernment and therefore intelligently. But people who constitute the outer church act indiscriminately because they are unable to make distinctions like this. It is very important to understand the idea in this passage. Yes, it is true. Everyone in the world is our neighbor, no exceptions. We have established that. That is the law. But if we just do good for everyone equally, exactly the same way, even for evil people, based on a purely literal reading of the word, without ever using our discernment, we will do more harm than good. For example, a literal way of understanding loving our enemies would be that if someone steals our car and we find them, instead of calling the police so that the person doesn't steal anybody else's car, we give the thief our wallet and say, hey, go get some gas at McDonald's while you're at it. The Lord taught us in the heavenly doctrines that we need to love our enemies, but we cannot condone the evil that they are doing in the name of love. That would be a flawed love. That would be a failure on our part to be good followers of the Lord. This idea is explained further in this passage from True Christian Religion, which you can find at the back of your handout if you would like to read along. And this passage says that loving the neighbor is not only wishing well and doing good to a relative, a friend, or a good person, but also to a stranger, one who is no friend, or a wicked person. But charity is exercised in different ways with these two groups, by means of direct kindnesses to a relative or friend, but by indirect kindnesses to one who is no friend or wicked. These indirect kindnesses are done by way of appeals, penalties, and punishments, and so by attempts to reform him. The following can serve as an illustration. A judge who punishes a wrongdoer according to the law and justice is loving his neighbor, for thus he reforms him and takes care to prevent his fellow citizens being wronged. Everyone knows that a father who chastises his children when they do wrong loves them. And in the opposite case, if he does not chastise them for it, he loves their faults, and this cannot be called charity. Moreover, if anyone repels an unfriendly attack and strikes the attacker in self-defense, or hands him over to a judge so as to avoid suffering harm, still with the intention of becoming his friend, his actions are in the mainstream of charity. Neither are wars which are intended to protect one's country or church contrary to charity. The purpose for which they are taken determines whether or not they are charitable. It is true that we need to love our enemies, but that doesn't mean that we cannot defend ourselves or the people around us from those who would try to harm us. All throughout the Word, we find stories in which the Lord commanded His people to defend themselves from enemies that wanted to hurt them and enslave them. In those cases, the motivation wasn't just to hurt their enemies so that they could feel superior and get revenge, because the Lord doesn't want us to act out of revenge, but out of love and justice. Revenge isn't justice. Revenge is selfish, but justice looks towards the common good, not just for ourselves, but for everybody around us, and even for our enemies. This is why the passage mentions judges who incarcerate criminals so that they do not hurt other people and so that they may have a chance of being reformed. The purpose for which we do these things to our enemies determines whether we are acting out of love or acting out of hatred. When we are acting out of love and out of a desire to protect ourselves, we must also look towards the good of our enemies. We may be thinking, even if it is uncomfortable for this person right now, will it lead to a greater good down the line? For example, will getting a fine for driving recklessly on a bridge help this person not get into an accident in the future? If we are acting with love in our hearts, like the Lord tells us to, then we may hope that the consequences will lead not only to the best result for ourselves and our comfort and safety, but also the best result for our enemies and their comfort and safety, so that maybe they can also live a better life and avoid greater harm. The Lord told us to love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us, but it is very important that we do this wisely. If we simply condone and support people who are doing evil in the world, then we are not acting with love, because we are enabling bad behavior. But if we seek to act justly and practice charity for our enemies in a way that is according to what good they have in their lives, using our discernment to see what the best result is for everyone, then we will be acting with true love for our enemies. If we remove vengeance from our hearts and instead move through life inspired by love and hold people accountable for their actions without seeking to hurt them unjustly with punishments that do not fit their crime, then we will follow the words of the Lord when he told us, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may prove yourselves to be sons of your Father who is in heaven. Amen.